Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 12th of May 2014. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Town's developer is officially abandoning the game after unofficially abandoning the game. The new Unreal tournament has been announced and it will in fact be completely free, and Nintendo apologizes for the lack of same-sex couples in the forthcoming life sim Tomodachi Life. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. The creator of indie title Towns, which was perhaps a more casual spin on the Dwarf Fortress formula, has officially announced that they will not be developing the game anymore. In a post on the Towns forums, the developer Mobius has thanked the faithful fans of Towns and said that they deserve to know all the facts. Indeed, Mobius was a developer hired by the original developers to continue development and was offered 15% of the game sales after removing all taxes and Steam fees. Mobius has announced that this money is nowhere near enough to allow him to continue to work on the game. He claims it's not even enough for him to live. He did announce that he had been discussing a sequel to the game with one of the original developers, Zavi, which, needless to say, was met with a rather large amount of ire from the community itself. Towns was one of the first titles to be greenlit under the Greenlight system. Indeed, it was in the first wave, and previous to the early access program, it had actually been subject to alpha funding on the indie client Desura. The game was released on Steam and marketed as a finished product, which was in fact not the case at all, and it still remains unfinished to this very day. The developer Zavi Canal had abandoned development of the game after claiming he was burned out on development. According to the developer, the game has sold over 200,000 copies and generated gross revenue of $2 million as of July the 29th, 2013. Well, if this isn't a tale of woe and warning to those who would fund games that are clearly not finished, I don't know what is, but I feel that this was even more insidious, perhaps, than the games released on early access on Steam as of late. This is a game that was released on Steam as part of the Greenlight program before early access actually existed and was marketed as a full game. As it stands, no mention of this game being unfinished is anywhere on the Steam page. The only banner available there is not in fact one that says this game is unfinished and in alpha, so beware. It's actually one that says the community helped pick this game by voting for it on Steam Greenlight, which I think is a nice little subtle way of Valve saying this is all your fault. Since then, of course, we have had various games that have gone into early access and simply never come out of it, because there doesn't appear to be any obligation to ever come out of it, nor to hand back the money and offer refunds if, in fact, the game is not in a good state. It's only very recently that Steam has actually allowed a refund for a title that was not up to scratch. The early access title Earth Year 2066 was removed from Steam after apparent deceptive marketing, and refunds were indeed allowed. The game's page remains up. However, the game developer's statement at the top of the page has been deleted, and it is impossible to purchase the game at this time. The only other case of something like this happening was, in fact, with the War Z, when it was also removed for about a week, when the developer had posted false and misleading statements on the game's page itself, claiming that the game had features which it clearly did not. I'm honestly not sure which is worse, Valve's obviously laissez-faire attitude, or should I say lazy-fair attitude, or the fact that the developers deliberately misled their community and buyers over and over again in order to pocket $2 million in gross revenue, and then decided to be burned out on the game and make a ridiculous offer to a third-party developer to continue with the development. I'd actually also like to know why this developer accepted such an obviously terrible deal. 15% of revenue after taxes and the Steam cut? That's dreadful. I mean, that is most likely less than 10% per copy sold. And this is a deal based on the current version of the game, which is not selling because it is covered in negative reviews, and a lot of people now know that this game is basically an unfinished scam. If anything, one could certainly accuse this new developer of being extremely naive, although we should perhaps not engage in victim blaming at this point. He was indeed attempting to continue development of the title at the behest of the community and the original developers. He didn't manage to do so and has had to abandon the project, but really that's nothing more than one in a string of failures which began, of course, at the original developer's front door. As much as I like to promote indie developers, I would like you guys to be extremely vigilant when it comes to funding unfinished indie games. Why? Because indie developers have, more often than not, far less experience than these big studios. You can say whatever you want about AAA studios, but most of the time the game gets finished. You know, there's a couple of obvious exceptions like Battlefield 4, which was very clearly buggy, but most of the time, when a game comes out from a big studio, you know it is going to be a complete experience. Maybe they've sliced a bit off for day one DLC, but the game is going to work, and the game is going to be a complete experience. When it comes to indie developers, we are talking more often than not about studios that have no experience whatsoever in developing full-size titles. And please, for the love of God, don't look at concept, look at pedigree. I've said it before, when it comes to kickstarting, something that is, of course, becoming less and less popular, and that's probably for the best, if maybe a little sad, considering that many great games have been made as a result of Kickstarter. But look at the pedigree that these developers have. Do Xavi Canal and Ben Palgi have a pedigree? No, they do not. This is not an indie studio that has developed 10 good titles prior to making this one. This is their first game, is ludicrously ambitious. They asked for money when it was clearly unfinished, and then abandoned the game when they couldn't, quote, take it anymore. If you are expecting Valve to have your back when it comes to games like this, well, they don't. It is very rare for them to come out and offer refunds, considering those refunds usually have to come out of their pocket. It is very rare for them to actively police such titles. Anything that's in early access, with the exception of something like Earth 2066, that game being so incredibly bad that they actually removed it from the Steam store, is in Valve's eyes, and even in the eyes of many gamers, immune to any sort of criticism that you can actually level at it because it's not finished yet. You know what we used to do with games that weren't finished back in the day? Not sell them till they were. That's a pretty good idea, isn't it? But early access is a big earner for Steam. There's no doubt about it. If I go on at the top sellers, what do I find? DayZ, still selling. I mean, the only reason that we don't see more early access games on that list is the fact that there's a really good sale going on at the moment. But DayZ is currently number 2 under the BioShock Triple Pack. Rust can be found on the next page. Lichdom Battle Mage can be found on the page underneath that. Tropico 5 can be found on the page underneath that, although, admittedly, that is a company with pedigree, so I can understand people trusting them. And then, of course, things like Goat Simulator, which are broken by design, and indeed Starbound, which, yes, is a good game, there's no doubt about that, but as I've said many times before, do you really need to buy something that's unfinished when there are so many good titles available that are actually finished? One way or the other, it's abundantly clear that a lot of people screwed up in a really big way when it comes to Towns. I feel very sorry for those that trusted that developer, especially bearing in mind that this is something that happened prior to early access. I would like to say that gamers are more aware of the pitfalls of early access and are less willing to purchase. But considering the sales figures of DayZ, Rust, 7 Days to Die, and myriad other early access games, I don't think that's necessarily the case. As far as I'm concerned, this is a clear case of false advertising. When Towns initially came out, it came out as a finished game. It clearly was not. Valve did basically nothing about it, and continues to allow a game that will now clearly never be finished to stay on its Steam page. Now, if you don't think that Valve has at least some degree of responsibility to try and police this kind of stuff, then you are certainly a far more forgiving person than I. That I can tell you for a fact. In a follow-up to the story that we aired last week in regards to an upcoming Unreal Tournament game, well, it's been announced, and it was better than we could have possibly hoped for. Both on this show and on the Co-optional podcast, I expressed doubts that it would be possible for Epic to actually come up with something that was a true PC experience without admiring it in the recent FPS developments of progression systems, free-to-play business models, microtransactions, and indeed the even worse possibility of a multi-platform release on consoles, which would inevitably cause the game to be less competent when it came to Twitch arena shooting. Well, it turns out Epic did have a solution, and I feel like an idiot for not seeing it coming. Epic is going to be releasing Unreal Tournament 4, and it will be completely free. The game is designed, of course, in the Unreal 4 engine. It will be a collaborative development, which will allow Unreal developers to even get a look at the source code, which is currently available if you have a subscription to the Unreal 4 engine. It will be developed, quote, with the community, and it will be released eventually for free, and by free we mean free, not free to play, with an eventual content store released later on for content developed by the users themselves. So they're going down the Dota 2 route of allowing community development and then taking a slice of that pie off the top. So they're looking for things like skins and, of course, graphics modifications, but also full-on mods for the game. Indeed, the game is designed around modding in almost every respect. However, just like Dota 2, they intend to monetize these creations. It's a fantastic model. I'm going to be totally honest. That is genius, and I'm an idiot for not thinking of it sooner. It is going to be very interesting to see how that works, but what is interesting to me is the parity, I think, between Dota 2 and Unreal Tournament 4. The idea that both of these titles, which will no doubt still be commercially successful, we already know that Dota 2 is, were also designed in such a way to attempt to market the platform that they are running on. In the case of Unreal 4, this is something to really push the Unreal 4 engine. There were jokes made a long time ago about id Software and the idea that all their games are just glorified tech demos for the id Tech engines, and to some degree, of course, people were right about that. In this case, not only are they making a tech demo for the engine, but the engine is now very cheap for indie developers. The subscription cost is very low. And indeed, if you get to a certain amount of income, you'd want to buy a full-on commercial license instead of going down the indie route of the subscription and giving 5% of your revenue to the Epic Games guys. It is viable to use that engine, and they're not the only engine on the block at the moment. CryEngine 3 is being offered at a ridiculously low rate at the moment, and it seems like an arms race is starting to develop. Now, of course, the Unreal Engine's dominance, particularly in the previous generation, is obvious. The Unreal 3 engine has been used for a great deal of games. CryEngine 3 has certainly not, so it is something that Crytek are looking to try and take away from Epic Games. But I think this is a really good move here from Epic. I mean, as an Unreal Tournament player, I would love to see a real game, and I think that this is the only way that that could feasibly be developed. And honestly, I love the legitimization and commercialization of mods. And you might be saying, well, why on earth do you love the commercialization of mods? Well, I like it simply because I do believe that the people that spend so much time developing these things are entitled to be compensated for their work. I think that developing mods is a great way to get into the games industry. It develops valuable experience. A lot of people get hired as a result of their work on mods. And of course, one of the big strengths of the PC platform is the ability to create mods for your games and to customize that kind of experience. The downside of what they're doing, and there is a downside, is that we will most likely not be seeing really cool mods that play off existing IP. More often than not, you can get away with that when you're developing something for free. It's the reason why we have, say, an Aliens mod for Killing Floor. It's the reason why we have Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Star Trek mods for many, many games indeed, and those games have benefited very much so from the creation of those. That will not be okay under that system. Epic Games is not going to take that kind of risk, and they're certainly not going to allow you to sell those things, so it could be that we see a vast reduction in those kind of games, which is going to be disappointing to a lot of people. But on the plus side, think about what Unreal Tournament spawned. I mean, Air Buccaneers was originally an Unreal Tournament 2004 mod. That became a really great game in its own right. Killing Floor was an Unreal Tournament 2004 mod, and that too became a great game in its own right. And there are plenty of examples of games that came from the mod, and they ended up being really, really good. This could legitimize that in a very big way indeed, and more to the point, provide a platform where standalone development isn't even required. They can release the mod, they can charge it, and they can make money for it, which to me sounds like an absolutely fantastic idea. So I'm, at least at this point, in full support of what Epic Games is doing right now. I didn't see it coming. I should have seen it coming, but it is a very smart way to develop this indeed, and also, of course, handily enough, allows them to crowdsource a lot of the work that they're actually going to have to do for the bloody thing. So, there you go. Not only do they have to pay less for the sodding thing, but they're also able to gain community goodwill in the process. So, well done, you sneaky, sneaky bastards. And finally, after finding itself in the center of a rather large storm of controversy, Nintendo has apologized for the lack of inclusivity in their forthcoming life sim Tomodachi Life and promised more inclusivity in future titles. In a statement on Nintendo's website, they said that they pledge, if we create a next installment in the Tomodachi series, we will strive to design a gameplay experience from the ground up that is more inclusive and better represents all players. We apologize for disappointing many people by failing to include same-sex relationships in Tomodachi Life. Unfortunately, it is not possible for us to change this game's design, and such a significant development change can't be accomplished without a post-ship patch. The lack of same-sex marriages in this title was actually brought to light due to a rather interesting bug in which it was possible to have a same-sex relationship because the game believed that one of the partners was actually of a different gender. So the systems involved in the game, including having a child, which is one of the big goals of the game, was allowed to happen even though technically it biologically shouldn't have been allowed to happen. That's where a lot of the controversy came from. The bug was patched, and then there were, of course, claims that Nintendo was not being inclusive and was not being fair. Now, I would like to say that I'm glad that Nintendo is being more inclusive. I think it makes a lot of sense, and when it comes to life sims, it is kind of ridiculous not to be inclusive in the first place. One need only look at the demographic for titles like this and, of course, The Sims to understand that they have extremely wide appeal, and that you would want to make sure that you don't piss off a portion of your demographic there. However, I agree with Nintendo when they say that attempting to change this would be extremely difficult. It would not be possible to change it. Now, as much as many people may believe that a hashtag is a substitute for actual coding knowledge, it is blindingly obvious that the mechanics of this game are designed around heterosexual relationships. Yes, it would be very easy to allow same-sex couples to marry, and frankly, I think that they should be able to do so in this game. The problem with that is that the end goal of the game, and one of the main mechanics of it, is to have a child, which of course would be impossible without some sort of adoption or sperm donor system, depending on what gender the partners happen to be. That would actually be a major coding effort. That is a set of brand new mechanics and systems that would have to be added to the game, which at this point is, let's be honest, simply not going to happen. Would it happen in a sequel? Probably, yes, because they kind of know this from the very start. Should it have happened prior to this? Yes, it probably should. Although, should we really be blaming Nintendo for not including such things when so many other games also do not allow for such relationships? We probably should to some degree. Again, it's a life sim, yeah? This is not a first-person shooter. It is more understandable for the developer of an FPS to develop it with a male protagonist with a female love interest or vice versa. It sucks that that is the case, and that we can't have homosexual or transsexual relationships in those games, and we can't create compelling characters of those particular sexualities, but the games industry in general has a massive problem when it comes to writing engaging characters, regardless of what's going on. I mean, they are so far behind television and even film at this point when it comes to creating intriguing characters. It beggars belief. It's one of the main problems we have when it comes to getting games taken seriously in the first place, and more often than not, when we see either bisexual, homosexual, or indeed transsexual relationships in games, they are often ham-fisted and not done well, and seem like they're almost just put in there specifically just to be inclusive, without any actual thought being put into things. You can claim as much as you want that BioWare is very inclusive, but more often than not, their solution is just make everyone bi and it'll be fine, which is a very lazy way of designing those characters. And you would think that since your sexuality is part of your identity, that would affect the character in and of itself, and it doesn't. Yeah, it's a very lazy way of doing things. It's like just saying, okay, yeah, we're just going to tick this box in the spreadsheet, and yeah, you can go hump whoever you please. It's entirely up to you. So what I do hope is, certainly over the next 10 years, that we do see better character development when it comes to dealing with these sexualities, but unfortunately we do have to accept, at least at the moment, that some of the demographic that a lot of these, say, shooters are aiming for are teenage boys, and they're not comfortable with that idea. Or indeed they feel that it's just something to be made fun of. I certainly hope that is something that they grow out of, and as everyone becomes more accepting of these relationships, we will see better representation in video games. That said, we are talking about the medium of the future here. I've said it many times before, I think that games have the potential to be something that TV, that movies, and even books cannot be. and one would hope that some developers would take the responsibility and say, look, we are the medium of the future, let's be forward-thinking, rather than being stuck in the past and repeatedly parroting sensibilities that are, as far as I'm concerned, long past their expiry date. So it's great to see that Nintendo is doing this. It's also good to see that a campaign actually had a positive result, but before I go, I'd like to just give you one reminder. If you are running around telling developers to kill themselves because they didn't happen to cater to your particular worldview, then the chances are that you are not in any position to be lecturing about morality. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch, but before I go, I'd like to give you yet another OC remix. Let's continue to bring you awesome cuts from the Shell Shocked Remix album, which is available for free over on ocremix.org. Do you like rock and electric organs? Of course you do, everybody likes that. So, let's give you a track by Washudoll. This is a remix of BGM 7 and Downtown Scene 2. It goes by the name of Duh, Who Put the Lights Out. Enjoy the progginess, and I'll see you next time.